Today on That's How Every Empire Falls, I've got Janelle Clausen and Dayan Reynolds. They are both democracy workers, or were both democracy workers. It might be a little hard to explain that. So I'm going to let them tell us about, what's been going on with their organizations and with US aid in general.
All right. Thank you, Trevor. So right now, Day and I, we are technically both still at the International Republican Institute, or IRI. We are nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We do democracy assistance around the world. And Day and I in particular were senior program associates in the Eurasia division. So currently, we are technically furloughed with our jobs considered on the chopping block as part of a reduction in force, like a lot of other people, not just at our organization, but in our industry for quite a few fun reasons. The first one was the reevaluation of foreign assistance, the executive order that Trump had put out in back in January, which essentially ended up stopping all funding to our projects. And then pretty much most of our projects ended up cut. So no funding for us, no funding for our positions. Therefore, we are part of the reduction in force.
So,
Yep.
yep, okay. Let's get to I want to cover this from a broad angle that includes everything from the international to the personal. So let's just establish the personal first. So, we have a sense of the characters here. Why did you guys decide to get involved in democracy assistance?
Yeah, so I can jump in first. And for me, this has been it's ultimately become my career and what I had hoped to do for my whole life. And I hope that that continues, whether it's in 4 years or a different amount of time that I can return to the field. Um, but this started for me when I lived for 2 years back in Russia, actually. My plan at the time had been to go into foreign policy space in general. Was always fascinated by that, even as a kid growing up back in the Ozarks. I just found something more interesting in the world abroad and wanted to go and explore. And I ended up living for 2 years in a place that was an authoritarian dictatorship. And I didn't expect that to impact me as much as it did, but spending every single day watching human rights get slowly more and more curtailed, watching people face greater and greater punishment, censorship taking place at the university I was attending, friends being manipulated into trying to get them into their version of the CIA, the FSB. I left Russia in March 2022 after the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And all I wanted to do was find a way to stop Putin and to join the fight and do something about it and make the world a better place. And I landed at IRI and decided that the best way I could do that was by promoting American values and democratic norms overseas. So, yeah.
Yeah, and my case was slightly different. I originally went to Stony Brook University to study journalism, did study journalism, and practiced that for a few years before ending up going to graduate school at Georgetown because I wanted to better understand the democratic backsliding that we were witnessing, not just in the United States, but worldwide. And I figured I would either go back into journalism or a different path would open up. And given where I am today, we can guess that a different path had opened up. I ended up at IRI, and part of why I ended up in that role was because I ended up taking a regional specialization in my degree, which was democracy and governance. I had learned more about the color revolutions, had been inspired about them, wanted to help build upon them, and this just seemed like one of the best ways where I could potentially make an impact because if we can make an impact somewhere like, say, Moldova or one of the smaller post-Soviet countries, as they would say, then that matters. Democracy at home, democracy abroad, it is all important, the global landscape.
Let's elaborate on that. Democracy at home and abroad are important for Americans, especially Americans who are a little stressed out about what's going on in their country now. Try to explain for a minute the stakes of democracy abroad in the context of interest to America, the country, and Americans themselves.
So, democracy abroad and democracy at home are both important in that democracy is widely seen as a positive good that helps foster peace. It helps foster prosperity. It allows people to have a voice. And in general, that is important whether you have it abroad or at home. And if you have it abroad, for example, there are things we can learn from other democracies as well, or other countries that are transitioning to democracy that are applicable at home. Like if we look at Ukraine and their democratic governance, for example, their e-governance, it has allowed their country to potentially function during wartime. And Trevor, could you go back really quickly to your question, the first half of it?
Uh, Importance to America and to ordinary Americans.
Yes, by us continuing to try and support democracy abroad, it is a very important aspect of soft power, of American influence, and of us having a positive image abroad, which I think it's safe to say we are having a little bit of a struggle with at the moment, given how we have been treating some of our past allies. And in terms of influence and why that matters in terms of soft power, that means it's more economic opportunity for abroad, more opportunity for Americans to travel safely, more, and in general, it just is one of the right things to do, and it helps improve our standing as a trustworthy partner if we do not necessarily abandon our allies, whether it is economic issues that we're investing in, diplomatic, democracy, security, and so on. And Dan, I imagine you have a few words to say about this too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. I think, Janelle, you're right on the head there with talking about how promoting democracy abroad and having democracies abroad that look like ours is makes Americans safer and more prosperous. I think at the end of the day, just like Janelle said, there's three reasons why this is important. There's the security, the economic, and the moral reason. And the security reason, I think, is the easiest for everyone to grasp. At the end of the day, Russia stationing nuclear weapons in Belarus is bringing massive weapons of destruction that much closer to home, that much closer to our allies, that much closer to Americans stationed in bases overseas in Europe. And that's a scary reality that I think, especially anybody in an older generation, can very much understand and relate to with having to do nuclear bomb drills back in school in the Cold War. That threat still exists, and promoting democracy is a way to counter that. There's the economic, which is just to say that America trades better with other democracies. Like-minded countries are more likely to join like-minded organizations, free trade groups, which is always a good thing for us. Where I grew up back in southern Missouri, we started getting used to in the past 10 years feeling earthquakes because of the energy boom going on in Oklahoma. They've been producing more and more natural gas, and that natural gas needs a market to go to. So good American jobs are employed by America selling natural gas overseas, and we're able to do that with our like-minded Western democracies in Europe. And our main competitor in that is authoritarian monopolies run out of places like Russia. But I also think there's the moral argument, just in the sense that nobody has ever been able to fight for democracy on their own. The United States' democracy was established not by ourselves, but with the help of the French and the Spanish, who fought right alongside us against a tyrannical monarch overseas. And for the same reasons, the people that I worked with in Belarus and the people in Russia who are fighting for democracy, they don't deserve to go it alone either. I think America has every bit of resources to contribute a small fraction to help them. So,
So, why might the United States president no longer be interested in democracy promotion?
Dan, do you want to take that or do you want me to take that?
sure, yeah, I could take the first part, then Janelle, feel free to jump in afterwards. You know, Donald Trump in his first term, um, I think the unlikely president that a lot of Americans, especially in places like Washington, D.C. and other liberal centers, were not expecting to win the presidency. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't have the experience of being in government. And so things were chaotic for him. And he developed a natural affinity for men who did not play by the rules, right? He saw in people like Putin and Kim Jong-un and others these individuals who were able to play the system however they wanted, and it didn't matter what the repercussions were. It didn't matter that there were checks and balances. And for a president who had all of these ideas for dramatic reform and didn't want to have to go through the democratic processes to get them done, I'm sure that was very attractive. And, I think just one thing is built after another with that. It goes from having an affinity for these people to admiring them, to want to help them. And democracy promotion, despite being one of the easiest ways for us to project America's greatness, to project ourselves around the world, to establish influence, just like he campaigned on, it's a threat to the kinds of people that he admires. And I don't think he wants to see that over there. And it doesn't help conspiracy theorists, along with Elon Musk, deciding that we're a threat to Americans at home as well. So,
Yeah, and I would also add in that Mr. Trump has not necessarily always been a big fan of democratic principles of accepting election outcomes. He is a win-win-win at all costs, even if that cost might be democratic principles, system of governance. And as Dan was saying, there are plenty of examples for him to potentially draw on in terms of how to consolidate power, as we are seeing now. But I would also say perhaps he doesn't necessarily see the benefits per se of a democratic system, which is somewhat unfortunate, or the anti-corruption reforms that we've been also trying to do in other countries, for example, to have like a safe business environment. But it is what it is at this moment.
It most certainly is something at this moment. Um, so you two are out of jobs. Um, how many people do you have any idea how many people across the United States are currently uh, looking at loss of work, loss of income?
so there are two numbers that I know of off the top of my head. One of them, mind you, is a month old. So the first one is 21%, which is the estimate that DC's government gave about a few weeks ago, maybe, or a week ago, for how many people will be laid off in the district by 2029. And they gave the longer roadmap because of all the court cases that everyone is tied up in. But that's roughly a little over a fifth of a city, and especially a workforce that largely comes from other states. So these are people that will immediately have ramifications with going back across the entire country. But when looking in at least our industry nationwide, IRI is very concentrated in Washington, D.C., but a lot of the other players in the democracy assistance space exist with offices all over the place to work with local American partners as well, in helping connect them to individuals abroad. And the estimate from a month ago was about 50,000 Americans who are losing their jobs in our industry, in the development aid space more broadly. So
Yes.
yeah.
I can confirm that as well. There's an organization, if you look up USAIDstopwork.com, they're doing some excellent work to try and discuss some of the losses with this. And the most recent numbers they have right now are about 19,000 confirmed American jobs lost and 171,818 confirmed global job losses. So that is a rather unfortunate number for sure, especially given the economic turmoil right now. You can imagine that there's a considerable human cost to that. Some people starting families, for example, or supporting families, having to deal with their mortgages, trying to make the rent, wondering how they're going to get through the day, and not just here. I mean, because as Dame was saying, while a lot of the jobs are concentrated in DC, there are remote workers, there are people that indirectly benefit from jobs when it comes to USAID and their implementing partners. So it's not necessarily a good thing for an economy that is dealing with a lot of shocks at the moment.
Yeah. Do you two personally have a backup plan?
Uh, I mean, not necessarily at the moment. Right now, the backup plan is apply for jobs, and we'll continue to do that. I think for a lot of people, it's going back on the old skills that we used to have. For me personally, that means going back into advocacy work here at home and hoping that something lands there. Um, we'll keep everyone updated on if that works out. So yeah.
Yeah, I second that. My backup plan is also look for jobs wherever I can in a very relatively broad space. And thank the Stony Brook School of Communications and Journalism. Is that the formal name now? For giving me a skill set in the beginning. But yeah, going wherever we can. A lot of us are looking whatever we can find, consulting, private sector, nonprofit industries that are still around, and trying to translate our skill sets, which could be fairly particular, as Dan could probably add on to if he wants to.
Yeah, I will just, I think, add that, like, I think one of the things that's important to remember is the scale to which these firings are happening, right? A conversation that we've all had on a regular basis now is it would be one thing if IRI folded. It would be another thing if the democracy assistance industry folded. But it is not just development aid, it is government jobs across all of the agencies. It is contractor jobs for anybody who had contracts or associations with the government. It's lobbying groups, law firms, higher education. For an administration that wanted to focus on job creation, the scale of the layoffs has just been so unprecedented. And a lot of these people, including myself, as of last year, have gotten graduate level degrees that were nichely focused on what we did and what we excelled at. And now we're all competing for the same basic space. I think any American who came to Washington, D.C. would be surprised to learn that even a job at a coffee shop is now considered competitive as an opportunity. So, yeah, we're all in this.
Yeah, some of our friends and some of my friends particularly have been literally applying to dozens, over 100 jobs at this point, and it is a little bit unnerving, and I feel a little bit sad for people that are just coming out of graduate school in Washington, D.C., or people that have just moved here just to find the a huge, space pulled out from under them between government, the reshuffling of the government departments, the State Department particularly having some interesting transformations, USAID's collapse, and so on and so forth. So wishing them luck as well as us.
What is going on with this country? If you were being a democracy advocate in another country and you saw the exact things going on with that country that you see here, what would some of your reactions be?
I think I'd be scared. I think, you know, a lot of Europeans already kind of looked at American democracy with a bit of concern, just because we've become so polarized over the past decade in particular, that it's gotten really hard to get anything done. And we saw similar trends in Europe as a result, and a lot of the far right parties, a lot of the anti democratic groups that existed in Europe really looked up to America's right wing and conspiracy leaders as examples of things to emulate in their countries, right, to model themselves off of. And now, we keep hitting points where we thought this would never happen before. So we didn't expect the scale of like freezes when that happened in our industry. And then we didn't expect the degree of the layoffs. And then we thought, well, Congress will step in, and it didn't. And then we thought, well, the Supreme Court, the court system will be able to prevent him. And now the administration is openly skirting around court decisions. And I think regardless of how you look at it, regardless of if you think that his views are something that you align with, if the ideas are good, because we should believe in a pluralistic system where everyone should be able to express their opinions and vote in line with them. The way that they are going about it is the problem. To use a quote from a saying that I've heard from people back home who supported him, he's taking an axe to things that should have been done with a scalpel. You know, we all agree that government needed reform, that things were not perfect. Janelle and I can tell you a million times over how bureaucratic and annoying our jobs would get because we were having to comply with a number of ridiculous requests that sometimes contradicted each other. There were reforms that were definitely needed, but this was not the way to go about them. Destroying this many jobs all at once, upending the economy on a daily basis, changing policies on a daily basis is not how government was meant to operate. And if I were abroad, I would start thinking about opening up programs in the United States, quite frankly.
I would also start thinking that. And an index that some of us turn to, the Varieties of Democracy Index itself has warned that in at least the last month of 2024, looking at that in the first few months of 2025, that the United States is showing some concerning trends of losing potentially liberal democracy status. So lots of threats to individual rights. So that's how we're looking at liberalism here. And that in and of itself should potentially be a concern that a lot of us should take to heart, that we are already having that as a factor. We are having countries issue travel warnings. And just anecdotally, we are expecting travel to come down to the United States as well from a lot of other countries, given the arbitrary behaviors we are noticing at the at airports, at borders, of potentially being apprehended for just so much as coming to the United States on a suspicion. And as Damon's saying, it's all concerning. And regarding democracy assistance in general, I will also echo that. We wanted a scalpel done to reform things, not a sledgehammer. And you will end up losing a lot of, unfortunately, you will be losing a lot of professional expertise, of institutional memory that'll make it hard to bring this back up to the same quality that it was before, or an even better quality, in my opinion, with democracy assistance.
Yeah, this is a country of 300 plus million people. I mean, at the end of the day, as much as we may dislike paying taxes, it takes a decent sized government to make that operate. There are a lot of benefits that we rely on as Americans that I don't think we often think about how they're paid for and who runs them. And losing that expertise is going to be a problem.
Yeah. Lastly, how would you advise people to essentially do the job of advocating for democracy in this country at this moment?
Janelle, do you want to start this one?
I think one fundamental principle that we have to remember is solidarity, in that we are not necessarily isolated. We are collectively going through this. And as individuals, yes, we have power, but together we have more power to actually have an impact, to have voices heard, and so on and so forth. Like every little action that you can take, whether, for example, it could be donating to an organization that requests help that's doing legal defense for people that are accused of crimes, is one aspect of it. That is an area. Another is just maybe getting together in a coffee shop, helping each other apply for jobs too. That way you can be economically, you'd be in a more comfortable position to be able to fight back as well. And in terms of the larger scale stuff, I'm going to toss that over to Dayan as well, because Dayan has actually operated in a more authoritarian context in the past, whereas I've been fairly lucky to work in a little bit of a less authoritarian context with my job.
Yeah, whereas Janelle worked on Moldova, I worked on Belarus and authoritarian regimes and that kind of grassroots advocacy, and that was my focus. And yeah, I think silence is maybe the biggest threat that we have to ourselves and to the state of our democracy. The hands-off protest happened not that long ago now, starting in DC as the main hub, but then spreading across the nation. There were protests even in my hometown of Joplin, which is just 50,000 people. There were people on the streets protesting against this kind of way of government. that protest was really good and that was important as a way to stand together in that moment. But the thing that historically has made democratic movements succeed abroad is sustained activism. And I think that's the really hard part in America's society. We're taught to work so hard, be so productive. We have to be doing things every single day that it's hard to tell Americans that the solution is they have to be willing to sacrifice a little bit and be in the street more often, be speaking up more often at city council meetings, at state government affairs, reaching out to their legislators every single day. But that's the kind of thing that gets stuff done overseas. It's building up that constant base of activism, that constant pressure so that the government can't ignore it. Yeah, I mean, that's how it works abroad. And I think at the end of the day, that's the only way that it's going to end up working here. So,
And be sure to know your rights.
yeah.
All right, anything you guys want to add?
I think we gave a pretty round covering of the whole space at this point. So,
All right, thank you so much, Janelle Clausen and Dayan Reynolds. Good luck out there.
thank you.
Thank you.